Right now I'm feeling proud of myself for doing something wild. This last weekend I and my wife decided to visit her family. They live in a much larger city than we do, and we go now and again to break up the monotony. On Saturday my wife and her sister wanted to go shopping at one of the larger malls in the area. Not wanted to do nothing alone, I tagged along. At some point while listening to their girl talk I decided to grab a bite, so I told my wife and headed to the food court. At this point, the lunch rush was still going on, so the place was fairly packed. I decided on Chinese food, a place I had been to before, so I trusted that the food was good. So I got in line to wait like anyone else. This particular restaurant was pretty simple. It had 4 cashier lanes and grills behind it where you could watch the cooks make your order while you ate. But being a Chinese place, it took longer than the typical fast food place, so the lines were moving slowly. While waiting my phone died. I simply forgot to charge it earlier, so I started people watching the crowd to avoid getting bored. Nothing out of the ordinary until I noticed Ed with 2 boys a little bit ahead of me in the line next to me. The 2 boys, maybe around 11 and 9, must have been getting impatient because they would periodically start to screw around or bug Ed, occasionally pushing each other around or asking when they would have food. Ed looked like he was growing more agitated by the minute. Every time he had to turn to deal with these 2, his face grew redder and redder. Understand, dear reader, that this was a busy, loud area and they weren't being super loud, so they didn't really attract attention yet. I did, however, have to turn away now and again to avoid being noticed though. The trouble started when Ed finally reached his turn. The girl politely did the usual and asked him for his order. But instead of just ordering, Ed started to complain, mainly about how long he and the 2 boys were in line for. She did her best to be polite, but he just kept going for a few minutes. By this time the gentleman behind the trio was also getting annoyed. He noticed me and gestured to Ed with the "you gotta be kidding me" look, so I just responded with a shrug. As far as I knew, he wasn't wrong. If Ed was in such a hurry, why not just get your food and be done with it? Eventually, the girl at the register was able to get the order. I was now second in place in my line and right next to the 2 kids by this point. I could hear the angry Ed go into a tirade about the performance of the restaurant and insist that if it wasn't for his kids wanting it, they would have gone to a better place. About how said Japanese place was better, but because it was currently closed, they had to suffer through this. Eddie even started to insult the poor girl behind the counter. The gentleman behind Ed and the 2 boys tried to tell Ed off, telling him they are just doing their best, but Ed shot back with the typical "I'm a paying customer so I can do what I want" excuse, and kept going. The girl was obviously growing upset as Ed was bullying her, and I could see tears start to form in her eyes. Ed just wouldn't give her a break. The gentleman behind the trio was also looking like he was getting ready to throw punches. At this moment I thought that I really wanted to do something, but I didn't want to get into a fight, even if I had backup or ended being the backup for someone else. That's when I noticed it. Ed was wearing cargo shorts, the kind that never seems to fit right. I thought for a second and found an alternative idea. I found myself just reacting, and the whole thing took only a few seconds. I stepped forward in between Ed and the 2 kids, grabbed both side loops of the seat of his pants and yanked as hard as I could. Without stopping, I immediately ran for it. I had to push through a lady in the last line, but I made it. I heard a lot of screaming behind me, but not wanting to get pummeled by an angry Ed, I didn't even look back. I ran to the other side of the mall where my wife was still shopping with her sister. I knew my wife enough to predict what stores they would be in. I felt safe enough in a girls' clothing store next to my wife, so after I caught my breath I just started laughing. My wife asked WTF and I just told her I would tell her later. I didn't want to spoil their shopping, so I spent the rest of the time keeping an eye out for an angry Ed. I did spot them at one point, now with a blonde lady and a little girl in tow, but that was it. I was lucky enough to avoid them. When we decided to go eat, the lunch rush was pretty much over and I just had to know. I went back to the Chinese place and luckily the young girl was still there, so I purposely waited behind an extra person for a chance to talk. When I got the chance, I asked her what happened to Ed. She told me that someone yanked his pants down mid-tirade. The guy who did the deed took off, but Ed couldn't catch him because the gentleman behind Ed took the opportunity to push Ed flat on his ass. The gentleman just insisted that he was trying to catch the culprit and missed. Lol. Then Ed, being the official center of attention, just grumbled for the rest of the time. He got his food paid and sat down on the opposite side of the food court somewhere. I wanted to laugh, but just in case, I never told her it was me who did the pantsing, even though I really wanted to, so I just took my order and joined my wife and her sister for lunch. I told my wife later and we had a laugh. She scolded me for pulling such a stunt, but was proud of me for finding such a funny method for helping the cashier. Right now I'm still beaming about it and wanted to share on Reddit. Beaming face with smiling eyes.